A Kitsune Remnant by Red Devil 360 Chapter 3 Initiation and Partnering Up. Naruto's deep blue eyes snapped open at exactly 5 a.m. as they had every morning for the past few years. It took only a moment for his vision to focus and his brain to catch up with the past week's events, but by then he had already sat up and analyzed his surroundings, looking for any sign of hostilities. Sighing in resignation, he stretched with a low groan and his bones cracked and clicked into place, and swept a hand through his hair as it sat low across his face due to the lack of a headband. His eyes traced the sleeping students below him. However, none seemed to be even stirring for their slumber yet. Considering that he could barely see the sun peeking upon the horizon, he wasn't surprised. With another stretch, he swung his legs around so they hung limply off the beam and gracefully slid off the side. He landed without a sound despite the height from which he dropped. Making his way through the students, he headed towards the general direction that he remembered the arenas were from the tour with Ospin. There were 4 hours until the initiation at 9, so he had a while to train before then. So with the decision made, he headed out. Line break. Naruto grunted as the clone landed a hit on his head, but he expertly ignored it and returned the favor by dispelling him with a quick stab. With a quick glance around, he noticed that he was the last clone present that wasn't already working on something, and with the swish and twirl of his practice blade, sheathed it on his shoulder. Impressive! A feminine voice spoke up from the edge of the arena he was training in. He didn't react to the voice, having already known the girl was there. Instead, he walked over to where he had put his equipment. Slapping a towel over his shoulder, he turned to the voice while taking large gulps from a bottle of water. The girl balked at the sight of his headband, but made no comments upon it. A simple warm-up. And you are? Naruto answered and asked. The girl held up a hand. Para Nikos. Naruto looked at the hand warily before taking it and shaking it. Kitsune, a pleasure, he said. He took the time to study the girl before him. The most notable features would be her waist-length, vibrant red hair, akin to that of his extinct clan. The bright green eyes peered back at his own blue ones. She was rather tall compared to the other women, standing near to his own height at 6'2". He would have guessed 6 on the dot. Judging by her grip, she also seemed more muscular than other girls and some men, which led to the conclusion that she was no pushover. She wore bronze form-fitting armor, and a nice form that it was, and a circlet handpiece holding up her bangs, much like his own headband was doing, along with a belt with a few pouches. She wore a red sash to complete the look. They released hands. "May I inquire as to why Shinobi is in Beacon?" Para asked politely. Naruto shrugged as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. "Sure, you're not the only one who hasn't threatened to kill me yet." They were quiet for a moment. "So, are you going to tell me?" Para shifted slightly. "You haven't asked me yet," Naruto said with a nice smile. The girl chuckled slightly. "Why are you here? Last I heard, the negotiations were still underway. Has there been improvements?" she asked this time. "I guess you could say there have been moving things along. Ospin invited someone of our choice to come here, hoping to improve relations. I was the sorry bugger that they chose," Naruto explained with a shrug. "You sound as though you don't want to be here," she questioned with a raised eyebrow. "Would you want to be in unfamiliar territory, surrounded by people who potentially want to kill you, thousands of miles away from your homeland?" Naruto shot back sharply. He glared slightly at her before turning back to the clones. He yelled something in Ninshu, and all the clones nodded and stopped what they were doing. Gathering his stuff, he walked past the still Para. "Are you coming? Initiation starts in 10 minutes." He wondered as he walked off. Para soon followed behind. They walked in silence across the school at the changing rooms where they split. He expertly maneuvered through the crowds of people, keeping to himself and making sure that he wasn't unnoticed. Ospin had been kind enough to assign him a locker in the back away from a larger crowd so he could gear himself in peace, or relative peace, as there were still people acing their own lockers. Opening his locker, he grabbed a scroll containing his combat gear before swiftly taking off his training one and putting it in an empty scroll. Opening the scroll, he put on his attire and attached up his weapons, pouches, and sheaths. He paused, however, when he spotted at the back of his locker the gun he had been equipped with. It was a black with white frame and grip, Agent K USP semi-automatic pistol with an inbuilt silencer. The ammunition was very similar to that used here on Remnant. Instead of that used by the foot soldiers were lead gunpowder were used to make the common munitions, whereas with the ambu ammunition they used chakra metal for casings and wind chakra as propellant. With the chakra metal, one could customize their bullets with different natures. For example, one could use fire for incendiary and lightning for armor piercing. Wind was found to be especially good at cutting through aura, while the bullets were lighter and the use of wind made them faster than normal bullets. They were still slower than most shinobi. This is why Naruto didn't like guns, apart from the fact they were used to kill a lot of his comrades and friends. Why would he use something that would travel slower than he could slit a throat? Despite his aggravations of the weapon, he still grabbed the gray leather holster and attached it to his lower back and grabbed some spare mags and slipped them into his kunai holster at his waist. Checking the scroll containing his training equipment into the locker, he turned and closed it, locking it as he did so. Turning on his heel, he walked back through the changing rooms, expertly avoiding confrontation as he did. It was all for naught, however. As he reached the exit, he spotted Pyra talking with the Schnee he had spied earlier, though it seemed that the Schnee was doing most of the talking and she was just standing there listening awkwardly with a strained smile on her face. Naruto tried to slip past to avoid talking with the redhead girl and just interacting in general with the Schnee. Unfortunately, it was all for naught, however, and he was apparently not sneaky enough, which was very unlike someone who could paint a mountain in a bright orange jumpsuit during broad daylight. Pyra spotted him just as he was passing, and as if sensing an escape from the Harris, called out to him, "Hello, Kitsune!" She yelled out to him with a friendly wave and in turn drew the attention of various other students to their position. Naruto felt the involuntary twitch in his eye, but he turned to her nonetheless and let none of his annoyance show. He inclined his head slightly in greeting. "Miss Nikos, I hadn't realized that you enjoyed my presence that much. We did only talk mere minutes ago," he said, blatantly ignoring the affronted look the white-haired girl gave him, and the subsequent glare when she noted his attire and headband. Pyra blushed slightly in embarrassment. She had come off rather desperate. "Sorry," she mumbled meekly. Naruto merely chuckled in amusement. "Anyway, I've heard that we will be partnering up for the initiation, and considering earlier I was hoping we could pair up," she asked hopefully. Both the ignorant the affronted look the Schnee shot Pyra. Naruto chuckled. "As much as I think our partnership would be beneficial to both parties, I'm afraid to say that I have no good information. The partners will be chosen during initiation rather than before. Besides," he glanced at their plus one, "you seem to be popular with the masses," he finishes with a smirk. "Masses? Masses?" the white-haired girl shrieked. "Brute, do you have any idea who I am?" Naruto cocked an eyebrow at Brute, but decided to humor her. "We Schnee, second child of Jackie Schnee and current Harris of the Schnee Dust Company, the same company infamous for its controversial labor forces and questionable business partners," he stated blankly. Whis actually backtracked slightly to that, having gotten the same response yesterday, but she recovered easily enough. "Well, if you know who I am, then you should be aware of who Pyra is and why I am a better partner." Naruto shrugged uncaringly. "Should I?" She is Pyra Nikos, four-time champion of the Mistro Regional Tournament and mascot of Pumpkin Pete's Marshmallows Flakes. So as you can see, you are out of your league, the strongest girl in class and the smartest girl in class. We would be unstoppable," she explained. Naruto started to chuckle. "You think I care about fame? And who is the smartest girl in class? You? Don't be stupid. You may be the best in book smarts, but it's what you do on the battlefield that matters most. It doesn't matter if you know every weak point on the grim if you can't hit them." He turned to Pyra. "I apologize if I have offended you in any way, Miss Nikos, but I know more famous people than I can count on both hands. You are no different," he said with a slight bow as Pyra waved him off with a small smile, happy that someone didn't care about her fame, no matter who it was. Who could you possibly know that is famous? You're probably some random person they picked so they didn't have to send someone of their best." We shrieked once again, offended. Naruto chuckled inwardly. If only she knew. "It matters not if you believe me, Miss Schnee. Your opinion doesn't change fact." He turned to Pyra one last time. "I would be more than happy to partner with you should we cross paths in the forest, Miss Nikos," he offered with a smile. Pyra smiled warmly at him. "Please, call me Pyra." Naruto inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement before turning on his heel and striding off only for his figure to be blown away by the wind as he exited the doors. Whis huffed in frustration. "The nerve of him, huh, Pyra?" She looked at the redhead standing beside her. "Pyra, The girl in question didn't answer as she continued to stare at the point. Kitsune disappeared. Naruto stood at the edge of the cliff, looking deadpan at the launch platform beneath his feet. He didn't know why he was required to use this. He could probably jump farther than they shot with the addition of some chakra, but that was besides the point. He once again idly listened to Ospen, having been briefed ahead of time. He knew what was going on, so the instructions that he was given to the other students were useless to him. He didn't, however, take notes of the various looks students were giving him. Obviously, there were those that were wary of him and gave him scared glances, but what confused him were the curious ones. A girl that seemed to be a permanent sugar high with hair that looked strangely familiar, similar to the tracksuit he used to wear, and the youngest he had spotted earlier on was looking at him with glimmers of her eyes. Yeah, well, until what must have been her sister belittled her and sent a scathing glare at him that had he been any lesser man would have been incinerated on the spot. The only friendly glance he got was from Pyra, which he returned in kind. It would be beneficial to make some friends, friendly acquaintances at least, if to only make his stay here somewhat bearable. Naruto switched his attention back front when the students started shooting off into the forest and prepared himself for his own. It wasn't a sudden venture. He felt the pad vibrate slightly beneath him before he shot off into the forest at speeds which surprised him somewhat. It seemed he had underestimated the ability of their contraptions. No matter. As he flew, he observed the other initiates use different strategies to land safely on the ground. The red and black-haired girl who had first crashed directly through a bird pulled out a chunk of metal that transformed into a rather large scythe, forcing Naruto to recall a particularly drunkard he fought during the war, which she then dug into a tree in her path and used it to slow her fall to the ground below. Pyra equipped a shield and demolished the few trees in her way before landing safely on one, and the blonde sister used what appeared to be shotgun gauntlets to propel herself further before disappearing beneath the tree line. Naruto himself landed on a branch of a tree and shattered it around the forest as he launched himself off and began tree hopping at a speed that made him nothing but a blur. He stopped after a few minutes and steadied himself on a tree that stood higher than most, not too sure for the supposed ruins where the relics were apparently meant to be collected. Osmond said to head north, and after checking the position, he oriented himself in the right direction. If he focused, he could just about pinpoint the higher points of the ruins just before the cliff face. He wasn't far then. Naruto crouched to continue up jumping again, but paused and remembered the reason he had to take part in the initiation at all. Sighing in resignation, he instead dropped to the ground without a sound, despite the multitude of sticks and leaves covering it. He wouldn't mind a partner by moving through the trees. After about 10 minutes of walking, a little faster than what most shinobi would consider civilian pace, he started hearing the first signs of Grimm, but they came accompanied with gunshots. Naruto sped up his pace somewhat to reach the fighting, and the tree soon opened into a small clearing. The red-hooded girl was among those fighting in the clearing, however. She was the only human. She seemed to have been struggling across a small horde of Grimm during her journey in the forest and was handling rather well. Naruto watched her from the edge of the clearing as she went about killing the Grimm around her with a brilliant skill for someone so young. Of course, there were people heaps better at her age, himself included, but it was impressive nonetheless for someone from Remnant. It seemed, however, she still had much to learn, as she had become so engrossed with her fighting that she failed to see an Ursa sneaking behind her until it was too late to either kill it or move out of the way. Thus, when she was swatted across the clearing and made vulnerable to the few Grimm still remaining, Naruto didn't hesitate to act. Ruby was scared as she scrabbled back away from the approaching Grimm. It had all been going too well. She had always caught a criminal in the act, and instead of being punished, was given a place at Beacon so she could go with her sister. And although there were downsides, like exploding before even stepping a foot in the school, she had fun having a big slumber party with her sister. There were even rumors of one of those cool ninja would be attending the school. She even thinks she saw one. Yang seemed less than pleased at the prospect, though she wouldn't tell her why. Now, however, everything was crumbling around her. She had made a rookie mistake and didn't keep an eye on her surroundings like her uncle had taught her, and it cost her. While her aura had taken the brunt of the damage from the Ursa, she was now disarmed and surrounded by Grimm. No matter how small a number they were, there may as well have been 100, as she had no weapon to defend herself with. Just as the Ursa had originally hit her, prepared to strike and possibly kill her, there was a flash of silver and it and every other Grimm in the area froze. Had it not been for the fact that the wind was still blowing and the trees moving with it, she would have wondered if time had stopped. Ohm's cruel way of stretching out her death. After a short pause, the Grim fell over face first, with the other Grim soon following his example. With wide eyes, she watched them disintegrate before her, but her attention was soon drawn away by the approaching man holding a sword and her scythe. "Are you okay?" he asked, striding up towards her. She nodded silently and grabbed the offered hand when it was presented to her. "That's good. What's your name?" he asked with a nice smile. Ruby smiled cheerily. "My name is Ruby Rose. Who are you? Are you the ninja I've been hearing about? If you are, why are you here? What does your sword do? What are all of those scrolls for?" she asked in quick succession, apparently her earlier misshape forgotten. Naruto blinked at the hyper girl in front of him, rather unprepared for the abrupt bounce back. "Yes, I most likely am, but I prefer the term shinobi. I am here in hope of improving relationships between our two countries. It's just a sword. They each have their uses," he answered in order. "My name is Kitsune, by the way." He glanced at the scythe he was holding. "This is rather heavy. You're stronger than you look. What's her name? Also, better take care next time. Someone won't always be here to help you." He handed the weapon back and swept the drop when she threw out hundreds. "Oh, thank you," so as she hugged it, after collecting herself. "My baby's name is Crescent Rose. She's also a high-impact sniper rifle." After looking at Naruto's bewildered expression, "It's also a gun." Naruto nodded in understanding. "I suppose this means we're partners now, then," with a bright smile. Naruto chuckled slightly. He was starting to like her. "Yes, I suppose it does, Miss Rose." Ruby made an unladylike snort. "Call me Ruby. We're partners now." "Very well, Rosu." Ruby cocked her head to the side with a confused look on her face. "What? It means rose in Ninshu," Naruto elaborated. Ruby grinned brightly at the new nickname. "Right, northwards," she commanded as she pointed in a random direction and marched off. Naruto watched in amusement as she walked off in the wrong direction, with purpose in her steps. When she turned back confused as to why she wasn't being followed, Naruto wordlessly pointed in the correct direction. She blushed in embarrassment and turned around walking back. This time, Naruto joined her. Naruto wasn't particularly sure how he and his new partner got on top of the giant Nevermore, or why he cared at all. What he was sure of was the fact that Ruby seemed to be enjoying herself immensely, and that they were conveniently flying in the right direction, cutting their travel time considerably. As Ruby continued to express her enjoyment, Naruto noticed that they were coming up to the ruins, and from what he could see, there were already people there, judging by the mobs of blonde and black hair. Ruby suddenly squealed in delight. "Oh, I can see my sister!" And before Naruto could even process that fact, she had jumped, and before Naruto could even process that fact, jumped off of the temporary transport and down towards the ground. Sighing in mild annoyance, Naruto decided to follow her example. Deciding to field test some seals, he slapped some of his explosive tags on the back of the Nevermore and slipped off, heading to the ground. "That wasn't too hard," Yang explained, stretching her hands above her head, her partner nodding her head alongside her. "Well, this place wasn't that hard to find," Blake answered. "Apart from a few Ursa at the beginning, they had an easy time getting here." Blake and Yang suddenly looked up in the sky as a drawn-out scream became apparent. "Heads up, Yang!" Ruby yelled as she fell towards the earth. She was abruptly cut off and replaced by a thud. When she hit the ground, she soon sat up, though with Chibi Grim and stars circling her head. "Did your sister just fall from the sky?" Blake asked, eerily calm. Yang, on the other hand, was utterly confused. There were several cracks and crashes, and a lone Ursa came thrashing out of the forest ahead of them, flailing madly. A blast of pink caused the poor Grim to collapse, depositing its now seen rider. "Aw, it's broken," the newly identified Orangeette complained as she got off. There were a few more cracks and another figure came rushing out of the forest and stopped beside what must have been his partner. He set his hands on his knees and panted from obvious exhaustion. "Nora, please don't do that again," he breathed, though when he looked up all he saw was a pink dotted outline and depicting where the now identified Nora stood. "Oh, I'm the queen of the castle, I'm the queen of the castle," Nora sang, now over by the relics, and began dancing and singing with the golden rook piece. "Nora!" her partner yelled, running over to join them. "Coming, Ren," she responded, saluting and skipping over. "Did that girl just ride in on an Ursa?" Blake questioned, asking again, this time with a small smirk. Yang, still unable to comprehend the events. Any piercing shriek, followed by a loud scream coming from the general direction that Ren and Nora arrived, alerted the group to more newcomers. This was proven when a heavily panting Whis burst through the tree line, closely followed by Para. The reason for the distress became apparent when a large and severely pissed off Deathstalker crashed through the same point Whis and Para came through. Did they just run all the way here with Deathstalker following them?" Blake asked yet again. Yang growled and let out a small burst of fire. "I can't take it anymore. Can everyone just chill out for 2 seconds?" she yelled. You could also hear a clock tick out to 2 seconds as we joined the main group and Pyra continued to fend off the Deathstalker. When it ended, Yang noticed something about the group. "Ruby, don't you have a partner?" she asked, noticing the odd number of people present. Ruby nodded her head and grinned, pointing upwards at the giant Nevermore circling above them. "He's on there," she told her, then, to the immense shock of all the spectators, said Nevermore turned into a rather large fireball. "Huh, that was bigger than I expected," a voice drawled from behind them. They collectively turned and saw the shinobi casually leaning against one of the walls, scribbling in an old black notebook. He finished what he was writing and placed the pencil in the book. Snapping it shut, he looked up to see everyone staring at him. "What? Did you do that?" Blake asked curiously. Naruto looked up to where the cloud of smoke was still dissipating. "Yes, that was awesome!" Nora yelled in excitement, throwing her hands up in the air. Naruto smiled in a slight amusement, and the girl continued on its excited blabbering. Whis groaned and narrowed her eyes. "What are you doing here?" She asked, with her hands on her hips and a demanding look on her face, despite the fact she was panting rather heavily. "I'm here to get a relic with my partner over there," he nodded at Ruby. "But I would ask the same things about you. Your partner is over there fighting." He nodded at Pyra. Whis huffed in annoyance. "If you must know, Pyra asked me to secure a relic while she held it off." "Yes, and so far you're doing such a great job at that," Naruto mocked. While Whis stewed in her hatred, Naruto stood from his position and walked up to Ruby. "Speaking of relics, have you grabbed one?" he asked, ignoring the scathing glare he received from Yang, even realizing that he was Ruby's partner. "No, I was rather distracted by the fact that I thought you died when the Nevermore blew up," Ruby chastised. Naruto looked at her blankly, and Ruby shifted uncomfortably from the look she squeaked in surprise when he abruptly flicked her in the forehead. "Thank you for reminding me. Don't just jump without telling me." Ruby pouted. "What, so you can stop me?" she complained. Naruto chuckled. "No, so I can jump with you. That shit is fun." He paused, and there was a loud smacking noise, and without warning, Pyra's body slammed into Naruto with a small yelp, causing them both to hit the floor. Pyra coughed and rolled off of a groaning Naruto. "Sorry," she apologized. "At least shout incoming, Pyra." Naruto wheezed, and he got up. "Sorry," she apologized again. "Great, now we can all die together," Yang proclaimed, throwing her hands up in the air. The high-pitched screech alerted the group that the Deathstalker was still an issue and skulking towards them at a steady pace. Having gotten rid of the person delaying it, Naruto dug his hands into his kunai pouch. "Ruby, relic, now!" Naruto snapped his arm blurred forward, and not a moment later a kunai pinged off the Deathstalker armor. Ruby nodded understanding and grabbed the black knight while Yang snorted. What's the little knife going to do?" she mocked, trying to ignore the frown her sister shot her. Naruto didn't have to answer, and immediately after Yang finished, the tag attached to the kunai detonated, carrying the grim in smoke and getting an irritated screech out of it. "That! Now let's move, people!" he yelled, getting them to turn and run into the forest behind them towards the cliffside. They ran as a single group through the foliage to increase security in case more Grimm decided to show up along the way, causing Naruto to limit his speed to keep pace with the others. Naruto dug through his pouch again and withdrew a paper tag. He then patted around the pockets on his flak jacket and withdrew an already inked brush. "How fast can a Death Stalker run?" he asked impatiently. "Around 25 miles per hour." "Or 40 kilometers," Ren answered from the back of the group. Naruto nodded and made some adjustments on the seal before slapping it on a tree as they ran past. "What's that for?" Pyre asked from beside him. There was an explosion behind them along with another shriek. "It's following us," Blake realized, and the group accelerated their speed out of principle. The forest soon led up, revealing a giant chasm in front of them and a single weathered stone bridge to cross it, with more ruins on the other side. The cliffside was just beyond that. "We're almost there," Ruby yelled in excitement. As they ran across the bridge, there was a loud squawk as another giant Nevermore bigger than the last, dive bombed and crashed through what remained of the bridge, separating Ruby, Naruto, Para, and Ren from the rest. If that wasn't enough, a series of crashes and crunches heralded the return of the Death Stalker. Once more behind them, albeit its carpets was scorched in places from the explosions. Turning to face the new threat, Ruby unsheathed Crescent Rose and charged the scorpion like Grim. "I've got this!" she shelled, disappearing into a mass of rose petals, startling Naruto enough that he didn't react in time, and with the rest already tired from the run, no one was fast enough to attempt to stop her. "Ruby, wait!" Yang shouted in a futile attempt to stop her sister from doing something she regretted. It was for naught, however, as Ruby attacked the Death Stalker. She realized her mistake when none of her strikes got through or even caused harm. When she tried to retreat, the Nevermore remained an initiate of its presence by hurling feathers at Ruby. While they all thankfully missed her body, one struck her true and snagged her cloak, trapping her to the ground. "Ruby!" Yang yelled again in desperation, this time being held back by Blake and Nora when she attempted to jump the chasm. It's fine," she shouted back as she struggled to unsnag her red cloak. Enough, though she didn't sound to convince herself. She paused in her action when the shadow of the Death Stalker had finally advanced enough to stab at her with its stinger. "No!" Yang screamed as the others turned away in horror. In Tanguru, the group looked back, expecting to see the young girl dead on the ground, but what they weren't expecting, however, was for the Death Stalker to be constricted by red, tilted golden chains. The Grimm struggled uselessly against the chains, squeaking irritably. A grunt drew their attention to the culprit. Naruto knelt on a knee, facing the large Grimm with one hand on the ground and another held in a fist, with his index and middle fingers held up right by his head. "Ruby, move, it's stronger than it looks," he managed to grit out. "Kami, it's strong, and I still haven't perfected Ka-chan's chains yet." Ruby struggled with her cloak again, this time yielding positive results as she managed to free it from the Nevermore's feather. She flinched when one of the chains holding the Grim broke off, causing the stinger to lurch further slightly. Realizing the danger she was still in, she backed off and joined the others at the destroyed bridge, to the relief of a distraught Yang. "We need to do something about the Death Stalker. The chances are that we let it live, it will kill more students in the future," Power said as she prepared the fight. Naruto shook his head. "Let me worry about that. You guys deal with the Pekin Nevermore circling above us," he commanded sternly, even as a bit of sweat dripped down his face. A few more chains came loose with a rattle, allowing the Death Stalker more room to writhe. "Even if you could take it on your own, how would we get across the bridge? It's too far to jump on our own," Ren questioned, eyeing the Grim as more and more chains shattered under its strength. His question was answered. A chain snagged up his body and coiled around his chest tightly, but not enough to hurt. Ruby and Pyre were in a similar situation. They were then promptly chucked across the gap into the arms of their teammates, though Whis needed help catching the much heavier Pyra. It was just in time too, as no sooner had they landed, the last chains holding the Death Stalker broke, releasing it and letting it charge straight at the beings that held it in the first place. To the surprise of the viewers, the shinobi charged it back. He slid underneath the pincers and stood using the head as a springboard to latch onto the stinger. From there, he placed a few explosive tags at the base before backflipping off and landing a few feet away. When the tags detonated, taking the stinger off with it, one less problem to deal with. Out of the corner of his eye, Naruto noticed the others still watching and snapped at them. "Nevermore! Now!" They acknowledged him this time, though Yang and Whis seemed less than pleased. Naruto turned and faced the still alive Grim before him. The old bastard, ain't ya?" He said, rolling his shoulders. Said bastard let out a shriek and charged him again. With surprise speed, with a grin, Naruto drew his ninjato and charged as well. Blocking the first strike, he ducked under the second and slipped inside the Grim's guard. Slicing it across the face, he took out four eyes before dropping back. This only served to anger it further, and it attacked with greater speed than before, putting Naruto on the defensive slightly. It didn't last long, however, as Naruto set a smaller tag onto the stalker's left pincer and set it off, causing it to stumble slightly from the force. Naruto then took his ninjato and charged it with lightning chakra, using it to pierce the Grim's pincer near the base. Changing the nature to wind, it heaved upward, slicing the pincer clean off. He repeated this for the second when it returned for another go, only this time cleaving it straight off. The Deathstalker stilled in pain and attempted to headbutt its enemy, but in an impressive show of strength, Naruto spin kicked it straight back, causing it to stagger slightly. Naruto jumped away and decided to put the thing out of its misery, flipping through hand signs quicker than most could blink. "Raiton, Raiko-kosen," he mentally shouted, and raised his hand at the scorpion just as a bolt of lightning shot out and all but cooked the beast inside out, killing it. Naruto shifted his vision to the rest of the initiates just in time to watch Ruby run up the cliff face with the aid of glyphs, carrying the Nevermore with her, decapitating it at the top of the great joy of her teammates. Naruto nodded at them when they turned to check on him, almost as if they were expecting him to need help. He chuckled as he sheathed his blade when he heard Ruby yell how cool her partner was. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. End of chapter 3.